All right. Hello, besties. Okay, cute. Hello, everyone. So we're just going to give one more minute for people to trickle on in. And in the meantime, I will introduce you to Gretchen Felker-Martin. Am I pronouncing your name right, by the way?
Yes.
Awesome. So Gretchen Felker-Martin is the author of our, May, April fiction pick. I'm like, what is time anymore? Our April fiction pick, Manhunt, and she is a Massachusetts-based horror author and film critic. You can follow her on Twitter at Scumbelievable, best handle, and read her fiction and film criticism on Patreon, Nylon Magazine, The Outline, and more. So Gretchen, thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. So congratulations on your debut. How has the traditional publishing experience been? And I'd love to know how this compares to your history of self-publishing and how you see the accessibility of your work shift between the two.
It's definitely been much more overwhelming than, you want to get down? Just make up your mind. Much more overwhelming than my experience with self-publishing, which I really like and could definitely see myself going back to someday. There's just so much more work to do. And a lot of that is sort of on the author these days because of the way that publicity works with social media. So it's been a much bigger workload than I was sort of expecting. And part of that has been exciting and part of it has been exhausting. And of course, just being exposed to like tens of thousands of people, especially with something that's so sort of hot button as Manhunt. It just takes a huge amount of energy. And I worked really hard for this for a long time and I've very much enjoyed it, but it's definitely been pretty strenuous.
Yeah. And I hope that you're taking time to rest and take care of yourself because, I mean, the reception of Manhunt has been, in the queer community, up and down and loved and talked about. And then with the J.K. Rowling army, like absolutely torn apart. But we'll get back into that a little bit later because I'd love to ask at least one J.K. Rowling question later on. But first, I wanted to share that I'm actually from Boston
Cool.
And my parents still live in Framingham. My brother lives in Dorchester, is moving to Brookline with his girlfriend later this year.
Dorchester.
Dorchester, yeah, no, exactly. But I know you live in Worcester. Am I right?
I actually live in Boston proper now. I'm in Roxbury.
Oh, incredible. Yeah. So I loved all of the geographic touchstones in this book. It felt really like homey to me, even though it was about the apocalypse. So can you talk a bit about how being a Massachusetts-based author has influenced your work?
Sure. Well, I grew up in backwoods New Hampshire and came to Stephen King very early, as any New England horror freak does. And so to me, horror takes place in New England. Like that's just sort of what my brain does automatically. And even though I love and adore horror from all over the world, when I sit down to make something, the thing that is most intimate to me as a setting is New England. And I think that the things that are most intimate to you are the most ready to be transformed into something frightening because of course they're already close.
Yeah.
And New England is also the place where English colonialism spills into the Americas. And I think that is about as what the kids say, cursed as it gets. We're sitting on a mountain of bones here as we have this conversation. And I think that imparts sort of an everyday horror to anything that happens here.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with the the idea that what is most familiar to you and most specific is the most easy to transform into something warped and easy to convey that to people. So absolutely loved, all of the Boston references in this, and was really, really spooky to me. Especially, as we're still living through a global pandemic. And I think being in this global pandemic has absolutely influenced my experience in reading Manhunt, and I'm sure it has for many other people. So I'd love to know, how has the last 2 years, influenced your writing of the book? Are the timelines similar in your mind in any way? As a reader, it seems as though 2016 might have been a transformative year, but I might just be projecting onto the timeline for this. So would love a bit more insight into that.
I think that the year I chose for the plague was either 2016 or 2017. And I had this idea back in mid 2019. So it was before even the first like whisper of coronavirus. And so I finished it as COVID was rolling over the United States. It was very, very surreal to sort of have my idea scooped by reality.
Yeah.
Not that it's unprecedented. Of course, there have been plagues as long as there have been civilization, but still very weird. And definitely writing and working in the plague changed the experience. Like, I can't speak to what it would have been without it. But the claustrophobia, the sort of ambient anxiety, I think those things are very much in the book.
Completely agree with that. Yeah. Especially within the bunker.
Right.
And the idea of, people knowing beforehand and being able to prepare, and, using it as an excuse to bring out the worst behaviors in people. It was a spooky read, for sure. But horror as a genre contorts our realities, to display, darker truths beneath the surface of the contemporary world that we live in. So can you tell us about your thought process with the use of horror and the apocalypse as a medium to talk about, any social issues relating to the queer community, the trans community? Is there a way that you use horror to speak to these social issues, or use it as a metaphor or a warning even?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if you're going to talk about contemporary culture, it's going to be horror by default, because America is in such a cannibalistic, horrific place as a nation. And not that it's ever been anything else. It's a country founded on genocide and built up by slavery. Not a great pedigree. But as it stands now, we're living in the backwash of the state surveillance apparatus pioneered by Bush and perfected by Obama, and in the total collapse of any kind of pretense of function on behalf of the people of any branch of government. We're watching the unelected ghouls on the Supreme Court roll back legislation that has kept people alive and given them autonomy and control over their own lives. I think that to talk about what it's like to be a person at all in the current era, you have to exaggerate. You have to show these pictures of violence and terror and anxiety, because it captures the feeling of what it's like to wake up every day and not know if, well, maybe you slept in a little and they voted your rights away.
Yep. Waking up to that news was a punch in the fucking gut, personally.
Yeah, I took a nap and woke up, and
I went to bed at like 8 p.m. the night before because I was tired, and I woke up and I was like, what the fuck?
Right, like, did I fucking swap universes?
Yeah. No, but only in this universe, I hope.
Yeah, truly. Yeah. This is the word. All the other parallel universes are like gazing through their little universal transversal lorgnettes at us like, oh my God, what are they doing now?
Yeah.
And I think especially being queer, for the past decade, I have watched queer and especially trans rights get voted on and overturned and tossed around like a handball all over the country and increasingly all over the world. You know, you're, of course, what everyone thinks about with TERFism and sort of anti-trans agenda is England, but it's spread to Northern Europe as well in a really upsetting way that I think both prefigures and follows increases in fascist behavior and thought.
Yeah.
That kind of granular control over another person's life and that desire to control even how they see themselves is inherently fascist.
Yeah.
And so when you live in this state where you're never sure when you wake up in the morning if you and your loved ones are going to be legally people,
Mm-hmm.
that's a terrifying way to exist. And I wanted to get that across in Manhunt. I wanted to bring it to a literal level where when you go to sleep at night, you don't even know if you'll wake up a human at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, especially for Beth and Fran and, you know, the young boys in the novel, that's a very real possibility for them if they have the resources to, you know, continue living to stay that off. I'm curious about what you said about the Maenads specifically in the book, because I feel like it's a very kind of reverse role thrown in your face where it's like, this is, you know, what's happening it's a metaphor for what's happening like in this country right now with this policing of your bodies to transform it into something that is palatable and useful for the fascist government. Yet we hear from so many different perspectives in Manhunt. We hear from Ramona, from Beth, Fran, Indy, Robbie, and then we don't hear a Maynard perspective. So I personally would love like a whole side novel full of the Maenads just to understand like the origins and what their daily lives were like and how they feel about their circumstances and how they felt about the rebellion and how that one specific Maynard whose name is escaping me, you know, helped blow up the ship.
It's funny you mentioned that. That book is actually sitting in my drafts. It's not finished, but it's something I've been playing around with.
Okay, well, please email me any more info whenever you have it, because that's super exciting to me. That's super exciting to my best friend who, you know, she and I read the book back to back and had like a 10-15 minute conversation about the Maenads specifically. So very excited for that. But is there anything about, you know, their perspective that you can share?
Yeah, absolutely. To me, probably the saddest thing that I have ever encountered is the trans people who align themselves with TERFism, of whom there is a non-zero number. And they'll say things like, you know, I accept my biology. I'll always be a biological male or a biological female. And they'll accept sort of the crumbs of civility that TERFs will give them as preferable to community with actual trans people. And I just can't think of anything more heartbreaking, because it's not like, you know, as anyone who is part of any queer community can tell you, it can be pretty fucked. Everyone is mentally ill and traumatized and sad, and just it can be a huge pain in the ass. Yeah. But it's a community.
Yeah.
And what TERFs have is what did they call it? A putsch. It's you know, it's a fascist mob. They have no coherent ideology. They have no real beliefs other than doing violence to people who they can reach and exert control over.
Yeah.
And it's just so sad to see people feed themselves into that meat grinder instead of accepting the uncertainty of going in search of queer community and leaving behind the world of straight people and the certainty that it has in it. I think a lot of people struggle with that. They struggle to connect their own transness or queerness to anything larger and to any other way of being. Manhunt is really a novel about assimilationism, and the maenads are forced and voluntary assimilators. They are young boys who are forced feminized so that they can have a place in the new matriarchy, or they are trans women who are coerced or who voluntarily sort of sign their lives away for same. And this sort of thing is endemic to all fascist movements throughout history. You know, you have prominent gay and Jewish Nazis during the Third Reich, which is just such a bottomlessly sad thing to consider. These people who have no empathy for the people like them, or who have successfully tamped that empathy down so that they can keep surviving and keep all their power and privilege. To me, the maenads are these people who have accepted second-class status, as so many people do. Think of cops. Cops exist to safeguard the interests of the wealthy, property, and all, merchandise, all these material things, but they're not themselves wealthy. They don't benefit in the same way that our oligarchs and plutocrats do. But still, they put their entire lives into the cause of protecting those things because they're bought into the system. They have these carefully cultivated beliefs that cause them to identify more with the people who keep them impoverished and oppressed than with their fellow people who are impoverished and oppressed. And a maenad is like that. They've made that same bargain with themselves.
Yeah, maenads are cops.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that explanation, and it really makes me think about how queerness doesn't have a script or a template that people can follow. Queerness is so expansive that it's impossible to have a template to follow at all. You kind of have to write your own rules and individualize it for yourself and for any relationship that you enter as a queer person. And I think the way that you portrayed queer sex and trans sex in this novel was such a beautiful, smutty, like fun, graphic, very descriptive outline of that idea that there is no way to standardize queer sex in like a replicable way, for following, for assimilating. And it was such a relief as a queer reader, personally, to see queer sex represented in that way, because I've read, queer novels before that kind of follow that heteronormative path and cadence and rhythm of queer sex. So I'm rambling, but I'm curious about one of Beth's specific sex streams early in the novel, where she, and if I'm misinterpreting this, please correct me, but it seems like she was imagining her penis like transforming into a vulva. And I can find the page specifically, but I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on representing queer sex in this way, and the characters specifically, in that specific scene.
Yeah, absolutely. You are interpreting that correctly. That's what's happening for Beth. And I think that sense of, we all know what it's like to have a euphoric dream, to have this dream where the pressure that has built up in your daily life over something that you want so badly finally releases, and you see what you want to happen enter reality. This is an incredibly powerful thing psychologically. You're talking about the instant and sort of arcane gratification of a long held and maybe repressed desire. So there's a huge outpouring of ecstasy and euphoria and sort of psychological pressure. And that's what happens for Beth. And then, of course, the flip side is that you have to wake up to the continued reality that you're trapped in.
Yeah.
But I think it was important to me to represent that these dreams are beautiful in and of themselves, that reshaping the body is an act of transformation. There's a wonderful quote, and I'm not religious, I don't believe in God, but it's by a Christian trans person who I've got to admire the fortitude of trying to exist in that environment. Who said that God created trans people because he wanted us to share in the act of creation. And I think that's really gorgeous, just like an incredibly touching sentiment. And from personal experience, when you do achieve the reshaping of your body and get to sit with that realization, it is incredible. There's nothing like it. And it was very important for me that I get that onto the page. In broader terms, it's, like I said, it's a really anti-assimilationist novel. And so I really wanted to throw the full gamut of queer and trans sex onto the page and show what it's like to love people with fat bodies and disabled bodies and trans bodies. Because when you start to value those things, that's when you start to gain the ability to move away from hegemony culture. You have to actually change what you value. And that sounds so obvious, but it's a step that most people never take. A lot of queer people, what they would like to get out of their lives is to find one partner and get married. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, I'm full support for even my normiest queer siblings. But I think in your heart, there's so much work to be done in uprooting what culture has trained you to want.
Yeah.
And that can be difficult work. It's not work that everyone is naturally inclined to do. And it looks different for everyone. But I do think it's vital.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And my religious trauma really appreciated that quote as well.
Yeah.
I mean, Boston. Yeah. Italian mother. Yeah. Sorry, Mom, if you're watching this. But yeah, that quote also really and that scene now really reminds me of Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl by
yeah.
Loved that book as well. And I see your face lighting up, so clearly. But wait, I lost oh, there it is. Okay, cool. I have my notes. But now is the time to finally talk about She Who Must Not Be Named. What was your thought process in including her extremely gratifying death in the book in the end?
She just kept fucking getting worse as I was writing it. Like, you know, when I started, I think she hadn't even written the Turf Wars essay. That happened right after I started writing.
Yeah.
And it's the name of the third book, which I had first.
Oh my God, the irony.
I know. I opened it and I was like, oh, you've got to be fucking kidding me. I've been scooped by J.K. Rowling.
This bitch is stealing everything.
There's simply nothing she will not take. But yeah, she just kept getting worse. You know, I don't actually like this movie, but it reminds me of that scene in Pacific Rim where the character is explaining that in the beginning, you've seen one terrible J.K. Rowling tweet per year, and then it's one every 2 months. And, you know, by next week, it'll be one every 4 minutes. Like,
And that to me is Twitter, and
Yes,
people just not knowing to shut the fuck up.
that is Twitter. Good Lord.
Mhm.
And just watching her choose this like incredibly targeted form of stupid, pointless violence as the world was collapsing around her made me so unbelievably angry. I was like, fine, I'll just kill the bitch.
I love you so much.
She had it coming, that's all I can say.
No, it was a great scene to read for me personally, and I'm sure for many other people. So thank you for putting it in some sort of reality.
My pleasure.
So in the end, the ending is just such a wild ride. There's so much happening, and then you get this realization for Teach's background and understanding that she has a trans sister. And this is, the source of a lot of her complicated hatred, if you will, for, how she feels about trans people, trans women. And she, enacts one last act of violence towards Beth by dead naming her. And when she's, down, can't exert any more physical violence, she goes for the lowest blow. But it made me think, is Beth Teach's sister?
No.
Okay.
So at the very beginning, the TERFs find Beth and Fran's bicycles. And later, Beth remembers that she left her old wallet in her bicycle basket, and that out of force of habit, it had all her IDs in it. And Beth never got her name legally changed. She's broke.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. It's all full circle now. It's all making sense. That would have been such a wild connection, but like connecting it back to that. Okay. My brain is satisfied. The mystery is solved. So our club is called Sapph-Lit, as you know, and at the end of the book, you included a Sappho fragment in the epilogue. And I have a Sappho fragment tattooed on me. I have a bust of Sappho tattooed on me. We love her. So can you talk more about why you included a Sappho fragment in that specific one?
I have been in love with Sappho since I was introduced to her writing by my classics professor in college.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel like if you want a picture of the continuity of the lives of queer women, it's hard to find a better one. You have this image of this woman who lived thousands of years ago, having these feelings that are so recognizable, that are so immediately, I'm sorry, the birds outside are going completely insane. I don't know if you can hear them.
It's pretty. I like it. Ambiance.
Who's having these feelings that are so recognizable today. Reading her talk about like other women's necks and the hollows of their throats and all of these things that are like have been eroticized among lesbians my whole life.
Yeah.
It's such a profound feeling.
Yeah.
To look back across history and realize like, oh man, we've always been dumb dykes. Like
it's the female gaze, like 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here, I'll show you. This one's mine. So fantastic. We have her fragmented, and then I have You Burn Me, which is my favorite fragment of hers, because it's just like bitches love to yearn.
They do. God,
yeah.
Bitches be yearning.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
So arguably the goriest scene in Manhunt, and this is by far the goriest book I've ever read, which I love. I total gore whore with like movies and books. Have never read a book like this. It was like so unique. And I cannot wait to read more from you in the future. But goriest scene is the hysterectomy scene with Karen in I think it was like some sort of town square or Boston Common or something. And I interpreted this scene as Karen betraying her sisters, haha. She was forced to lose the thing that TERFs consider make a woman a woman.
Right.
And this scene felt really pivotal for Ramona's character as well, who I'd also love to know your feelings on Ramona. One of the most like interesting characters, I think, in the book, in terms of like moral insight to certain actions. But anyways, again, I'm rambling. But yeah, would just love your thoughts on the gore and how that scene was a turning point in the book.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that scene is this recapitulation of what happened with Feather. Ramona is placed in this situation where, even though she doesn't ever consider that she has power, she could potentially change the outcome. And of course, like, it doesn't even occur to her because this isn't someone she's fucking. So why would she even think about that? All she thinks about is how sad it is that she has to watch this. And
So sad.
yeah, on sort of a larger symbolic level, I wanted to connect TERFism to the long history of eugenicism in America, and especially the sterilization of Black and brown women, which is integral to like all forms of Nazism. And of course, eugenics originates here with Charles Benedict Davenport, not in Nazi Germany. And as much as we're all raised to believe that World War II is like the last good war, World War II is two eugenic superpowers ripping at each other until one of them is dead. And it just so happens that the one that's a little quieter about eugenics wins. But yeah, we do everything that the Nazis do. We just do it softly.
Yeah.
And so it's much more palatable to everyone involved.
Yeah.
We don't kill disabled people. We just make them survive on next to nothing until they die for some reason. Who could say?
No way to trace it.
Yeah. It's soft, it's deniable, and it's palatable to the world at large and to Americans at home. And so I wanted to make this connection because TERFism, I think, is connected at its root to eugenics. And you don't have to look any farther than like the genetic testing that has happened at the Olympics, which has just been so unbelievably nakedly shameful. The fact that anyone would disqualify a Black woman from racing based on like her hormone levels, like, how do you do that and look at yourself in the mirror the next day? Yeah. Even if you know that the rules say that if she has such and such a level, you have to disqualify her, you should fucking lie.
Yeah, that's a human being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think like that's something that I want to get across in Manhunt. There are 10,000 situations where Ramona should lie. She should do something else. Even if she's not the kind of person who can throw her life on the line, she should be doing so much more than she does. And I agree with you. I think Ramona was very interesting to write. She's a really interesting person, but she's interesting in large part because she's very morally lazy.
Yeah.
She does sort of whatever is going on around her. And even though she has guilt about it and has some insight into like how wrong these things are and is extremely fucked up by them, you know, she's so messed up by PTSD that she's like vomiting in the bathroom during her own celebration. And
yeah.
But at the same time, she has no vision of what else she could be doing. And at no point does she develop this. It takes sort of the introduction of a substitute for the lover that she allowed to be killed for her to even consider doing anything else at all.
Yeah. And I think the way that I read a lot of her character was, of course, one being like a fetishizer of trans people. And two, the way that you wrote a lot of her like moral dilemmas in her head, she constantly is like scared of being found out, scared of being outed. She, as like specifically a tranny lover, and there was so much fear and almost dysphoria in a lot of her scenes. I wonder if you, in writing that, related that at all to the trans experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that chasers have a lot of weird gender stuff and queer stuff going on for them. And really the distinction between them and people who just love us is that they are unwilling to perform the work of separating from mainstream society. They want their cake and they want to eat it too. And a few of them will even ever recognize that much.
Yeah.
I think it's a really sad way to exist.
Yeah, agreed. So switching gears a little bit to a bit more of a happier conversation, I hope. You thank Tori Peters in the acknowledgement, and she's quoted on the cover and at the beginning of one of the chapters as well. And I was so lucky enough to chat with her for Sapph-Lit when we read Detransition Baby, I think 6-ish months ago. Again, time doesn't exist to me anymore.
Yeah, for real.
But over the course of the interview, if you watch it, you can see like the puppy dog eyes as I slowly fall in love with her over the entire course of the interview. And afterwards, I just burst into tears because I loved her so much. She's amazing. So
Yeah,
I would
Tori's
love
a
to,
genius.
yeah, I would love to know how her work inspired you, this book, and her reaction towards Manhunt, because clearly she loved it.
Well, Tori and I are friends and have been for a while. And she was probably my single biggest inspiration in writing a book that was all about and just for trans people. Like reading The Masker and Glamour Boutique, which eventually became Detransition Baby, and especially Infect Your Friends and Loved Ones. These are all like really formative books for me. These are these like self-published novellas that are exclusively about trans people, that are for trans audiences, and that circulated among trans people as it's pretty much its sole readership. And seeing her do these things and like be so unafraid about it really spurred me to do it, and then to be much nastier about it.
Love it.
Not that Tori can't be nasty in her work, but she's an incredible sweetheart.
She is.
Yeah. And I just adore her. You know, we've chatted and traded work and looked.
She's also a New England girly. Like she goes up to Vermont all the time.
Yeah, she's very New England girly. The pink motorcycle, just like, what a look.
We're obsessed. But one of the scenes in this book, I feel like kind of specifically related to, like directly related to Detransition Baby for me. And that was when Beth, Lita, and Zia see a lone elephant. And that scene just felt so profound as a reader. And I wonder if there's any connection to
the baby elephant speech.
The juvenile elephant theory.
It's actually a coincidence. I did not read Detransition Baby until I was finished writing Manhunt.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. But I'm very happy about it.
Yeah, I'm very happy about it too. I didn't put it together until, like I said, my best friend, who's like my life partner, she and I read the book back to back, and she helped me come up with a lot of these questions for you. And I was like, juvenile elephant, and she was like, I know. And we had like a screaming moment where we were like, oh my God, because I read Detransition Baby with my family book club, which consists of Paula, my best friend partner, my brother's girlfriend, and my mom. And Paula and I are the queer ones of the group. I was a gender and sexuality studies major, and have worked for sex toy companies and, you know, have that as my background. And Paula works for a fertility clinic, specifically with trans patients, was a gender and sexuality studies minor, also a queer person. We're both bisexual. So like, we were reading this book, and then with my mom, who is a straight 60-year-old white Italian woman from New York, and then my brother's girlfriend, who's a Boston girly, also straight. And we were just like, the conversation that it opened up, and I think it's due to like the accessibility of the language. And I kind of feel the same here, that while, you know, this is a novel for trans people, absolutely, I felt as a cis person picking it up that the language was accessible, the stories were accessible, the characters were accessible. And I'd love to hear any thoughts you have on, making this mainstream while keeping the intent that it has.
Well, it's an important value to me that anything I write be meant to communicate meaning. And I think that a lot of writers confuse being obtuse or being wordy with being profound. And I disagree. I'm more in the Twain camp that you shouldn't use a $10 word when a 5-cent word will do. Because what's the point of a book? Do you want it to not be understood? That's a stupid fucking reason to write a book.
Yeah.
So when I was writing Manhunt, it's for trans people. It's written as a love letter to other trans women, especially. But I wanted it to be something that anyone could pick up. That's important to me just as a general value of writing fiction. When I write something, I want it to be something that anyone could read, and if they sort of gave themselves over to the experience, get something out of.
I love that. So aside from Tori, some other authors that you thanked in your acknowledgements, I'd love to know how the Filthcore Queen came to exist, which, by the way, I think you should get that like on a desk plaque for your writing desk. I think that's necessary. So I'm curious to know where, other novels like Manhunt can be found in, or where inspiration came from for Manhunt. Is this just like something that you have inside of you by yourself? But for me personally, the novel that I related most to Manhunt is The Power by Naomi Alderman.
I've never actually read it.
You've never read it?
No.
It's not queer in any way, but I think the relation that I found was like one day everyone wakes up and there's a event that specifically targets biological sex to completely alter the gender power balance in society.
Right. Yeah, I'm familiar with the premise, and I do want to check it out eventually. They don't tell you this. There's no fucking time to read when you're writing books.
There's no time to read when you run a book club either.
Right. I've read like maybe 5 books this year, which is just so abysmal for me. And then of course you have to blurb things, so you can't even pick the books that you want to read. It's a nice problem to have.
Yeah.
Anyway. I would say that the single biggest source of inspiration for Manhunt, aside from Infect Your Friends and Loved Ones, is probably Alice Sheldon's The Screwfly Solution, which is about this sort of unnamed, unspecified event which causes all men to become violently homicidal.
Okay. I'm Googling this right now and purchasing it.
It's a classic sci-fi story. It's really genius. Alice Sheldon, who also went by James Tiptree or Raccoona Sheldon, because queer women be having a lot of names, just wrote this really like blistering breakdown of heterosexual relationships and the ways in which women exist around men and their lives. That is so fucking frightening.
It's from 1977.
Yeah.
Wild.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait to read it.
So that was a huge source of inspiration for me. And in terms of filth, like I said, I'm one of Stephen King's many misfit grandchildren. And especially for me, Clive Barker was a big deal growing up. I love Hellraiser. I love The Hellbound Heart. I love Imagica and like all of his crazy fucking whacked out novels and short stories, which are all about sort of bodies as this metamorphic substance, something that can and will and must change. I'm also a big fan of Melanie Tem, who's kind of an underread 80s paperback queen.
Love.
She wrote a fantastic novel called Wilding, which is about a family of women werewolves who have just sort of degenerated over the centuries.
I love that.
It's so disgusting. I love it so much. And I'm also a huge movie buff. I love Ken Russell's movies. The Devils is my favorite movie. It's extremely filthy and horrible. It includes like a scene where a bunch of naked nuns rip a crucifix off the wall and have sex with it.
I just watched Benedetta last night. I don't know if you've seen it, but like, yes.
Yeah, The Devils is like Benedetta on speed.
Love it.
Yeah. And I love Verhoeven too. Benedetta, Starship Troopers, all of it. Fucking Basic Instinct, God, what a man.
Okay, amazing. I'm forcing Paola to watch that movie with me, absolutely. So I heard from your interview with Shondaland that you are coming up with The Cuckoo, which is potential next release. Is there anything that
will be the next novel.
Mm-hmm. So what's it about? Any like timeline?
So hopefully The Cuckoo will be out next year. Don't, swear me to that, but the draft is in. And I'm just waiting on edits from my editor. The Cuckoo is about this group of queer teens who in the mid 90s are sent off to a conversion therapy camp in the middle of Utah. And when they get there, they start to realize that something at the camp is replacing the other campers and creating these copies of them that are identifiable solely because they are well-behaved and straight and cis and really sort of have nothing deviant about them anymore.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to give too much more than that away, but yeah, it's very body snatchers, very sort of Stepford Wives, and I can say it's much more disgusting than Manhunt.
Oh my God, didn't know that was possible.
Well, I've done my best. We'll see.
Cannot wait. And thank you for sharing what you can. Okay, last one of my personal questions. This is the longest my personal questions this has ever gone on, so I'm not sure we'll have time for any chat questions that come up, but is there a comment or reaction from a reader of Manhunt that has stood out to you?
I think the one that I always come back to is a friend of a friend who had just come out to her very conservative Texan family, and it had been a disaster. And she was going through this really horrible, hateful process with them that I just, it breaks my heart to see any trans woman go through this, any trans person at all. And she sent me this message about Manhunt, like, finding this book right now felt like having a community. And it was just like, oh, fuck God, why don't you just kill me? Because that's what I wanted when I wrote the book. I wanted people who live in pain to know, like, there are other people who are fucked up in the same way as you, and some of them love you, and everyone's doing their best. So it's the stuff like that sticks with me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's so fucking goddamn beautiful. Okay, rapid fire round, bit more lighthearted. What are you currently reading? I know you said that you haven't been able to read so much, but anything that's like on the TBR that you're halfway through and haven't picked up in a month? What's going through your mind?
I'm actually working, Grant Morrison sent me an arc of his novel, or their novel, Luda, which is about like this sort of, it's like a gonzo novel, like sort of Hunter S. Thompson-esque, where everything is a little bit off from reality. And it's about these cross-dressers and like the mystic techniques that they practice to create their personas. And I'm really enjoying it. it is unfortunately extremely fat phobic, which I was worried about. But what are you gonna do?
What are you gonna do? Okay, love that. And well, not the fat phobia, but love the premise of the book at least. Okay, is there a book that you recommend that everyone read?
Yes, if you guys have not read Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfet yet, get on it.
Okay,
You
tell
can't
me.
miss it.
Okay, noted. Writing it down. Next one. Did you take up an unusual quarantine activity? Well, besides writing a book, but like anything like weird that you started to do because we were
God.
locked away?
Do you see those shelves behind me?
I do. I was wondering what they were.
They're covered in little Warhammer miniatures, which is how I spend my time when I feel like I'm gonna go insane.
I love that so much. I took up knitting personally, which I know is like a very sapphic pastime, but like it really calmed the mind.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
it's very soothing.
Very soothing. Okay. If you could have dinner with anyone dead or alive, who would it be?
Shirley Jackson.
Who's that?
She's the author of The Lottery, the famous short story, as well as The Haunting of Hill House. And
Yes. Shirley Jackson.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Took me a minute. COVID brain is still.
I gotcha.
Thank you. Okay. Do you have a favorite class that you took at university?
I really loved my mythopoetics class. But being honest, the only professional writing instruction I ever got was that I took a 2-part course called Writing the Novel with a mystery writer named Bill Tapley, who wrote like, I think 25 or 30 books about this lawyer, Brady Coyne, who solves crimes. And Bill really taught me that the only important thing that a writer needs is a work ethic, and that the rest is just craftsmanship. None of it matters if you don't show up, sit down, and do it. And he was such like, I don't want to give an impression of him like he was simple or that he lacked finesse. He was a really brilliant genre craftsman and a really intelligent man, but he was very meat and potatoes. He would use beer in every single metaphor. And just every lesson began and ended with like, did you make your fucking word count? If not, what the hell is the point of any of this?
Yeah.
And I was one of the students who turned in a novel at the end, and I remember his sole comment was, "You've got what it takes, keep doing that." And it was like, yeah, thanks, Bill.
That's high praise from Bill, though. That's like,
yeah, it was.
It could be.
Turns out he did not say that to everyone.
There you go. Okay, so this rapid fire question was submitted by one of our readers, Shelby, who I don't think is on the call, but we love Shelby. She asks, how would you survive a zombie apocalypse? How long would you make it?
Oh my God, no, not at all. Assuming I had no easy means of just like probably a week or two.
Yeah, I'd say I'm about the same. But second part of her question, if you had to assemble an apocalypse squad, real and or fictional,
Christ,
who would like the few people on your apocalypse squad be?
My friend Julia Graffair, who's a wonderful cartoonist, can do anything. I have seen her literally build a flashlight in front of me with like an old light bulb mount and some batteries.
Get her on Survivor, yes.
Yeah. So I would definitely pick Julia. And then I would probably pick my friend Greg, who is like a extremely muscular woodworker with 1,000 children. I feel like he would be a really, really valuable team member.
I love that. Those are both great answers.
Thanks.
Okay, and then last few rapid fire questions, and then I think we're gonna have to wrap time-wise, but do you have a favorite movie with trans characters or trans representation in it?
God, this is a complicated version of an answer to that. I love Pink Flamingos. I love Female Trouble and Multiple Maniacs, and those all star Divine. Divine, of course, is Glenn Harris Milstead, who's not a trans woman, but he's solely famous for his drag persona.
Mhm.
And also, like, if you look like me, he's the only person who ever looked like you on screen.
Yeah.
But I'm also a big fan of Hari Nef in Assassination Nation. I thought she was great.
Love Hari Nef.
Yeah.
Okay, and then do you have a favorite TV show with trans characters?
I'm so fucking basic. I love Euphoria.
I haven't seen it yet. I'm going through like the queer TV show movie route right now. I'm going through it. I just finished The Wilds, which is a survival like show. I think Euphoria is next.
Yeah, it's seeing Hunter Schafer play Jules on that is really special.
Okay. Yeah. Now I have to watch it. Okay, and then do you have a favorite trans celebrity that you follow, or content creator or social media person?
I love and adore Carta Monir, the cartoonist, who's also my very good friend. I would say she's probably my favorite.
Okay, good follow. Well, that was all of my questions. Thank you so much for this conversation. I learned so much about the novel and cannot wait for the Cuckoo, potential Maenads novel down the line. But yeah, just really appreciate your time and the thoughtfulness of your answers, and really enjoyed meeting you.
My pleasure. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your questions.
Hey, of course. And I will share the recording with you once it's posted. But I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Thank you to all of the participants who joined us. And yeah, till next time. Thank you, Gretchen.
Bye.
All right, bye.